Greetings. Greetings, my brothers and sisters. How you doing out there? Ah, I want to say thank you for joining me, Chrissy B. Emotep, on the Chrissy B. Emotep channel, the YouTube channel. We're saying thank you for your subscriptions. We want you to smash a like on this video if you can. Spread and subscribe to the channel. Enemies, your friends and your frenemies and so on, and your families and your non-families about this YouTube channel. We've got so many things in store for you, brothers and sisters. We're going to make a lot of amendments to the channel. We're going to do a lot of things. We're going to change the banner. We're going to do a lot of things, and we're going to make it the state-of-the-art channel that is so on a parallel with some of the very best channels out there in the world. But one step at a time, as the scriptures say, you're going to creep before you crawl. So we're going to take one step at a time until we get to that end goal. So I hope you're okay out there. We're here to talk about Rasta importance, or the importance of Rasta. I should have started at 9 o'clock, but I had so many things to do. Plus, I had a couple of visitors here with me, and I wanted to go live when I'm focused properly solely on you, the listeners, and the audience, and not my acquaintances who's there keeping my company. We're here to talk about Rasta, and I mean, there's so many things I've got to say. So how to put it into words and how to put it into proper narratives. And I just want to say it's very, very essential, Rastafari, because I'm not here to talk about Haile Selassie himself. We'll talk about that another time. And we have spoken about Haile Selassie in the past, which has caught a lot of controversy amongst you, the viewers, and the listeners, and so on, and the public. And there's lots of, diverse opinions. And some I agree with, some I disagree with. Some agree with me, some I disagree with me. It's not a problem if you disagree, but you're very, very good and you're very mature enough to argue your point. But I'm obviously solely here today to talk about the importance and why it's important. I'm going to start off a bit like this. I remember when I was coming up as a young man, a young boy, young man, and I remember being from a Caribbean background, a Jamaican background. Of course, I was surrounded by a lot of Rastas. And a lot of the Rastas I was surrounded with were mostly the older Rastas. Now, I would say a lot of those Rastas I grew up with are probably passed away now, or some of them are very extremely old now. And they used to tell me a lot of things. They used to tell me a lot of things about my culture. At that time, growing up in the 80s, 90s, I was a bit too young to really know about Afrocentric things. And even though I knew about it, I heard about it, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't see my place in the whole movement of, being an African, being a young black boy, especially in the diaspora of the rest, the UK, i.e. UK, America, so on, even Jamaica, because Jamaica's part of the diaspora. As long as you're out of the motherland itself, you're in the diaspora. And it came to a stage where around 19, obviously, as I said, being from a Caribbean background, we had lots of records. So we had lots of roots reggae records. And at the same time, so we had Bob Marley, we had Dennis Brown, we had Gregory Isaacs, Sugar Minott, some of these legends who sang about Rastafari, sang about how to, what it's like to be a black person, especially in the diaspora and so on. And it started to resonate with me. Some of the lyrics to some of these songs I was listening to in the 80s, 90s started to resonate with me. And it made me more conscious. It made me way more woken. And I wanted to delve more into what this Rastafari movement is. And then I started to read about Haile Selassie. I bought books. I started to read, obviously, the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. I read that book, I think, 3 times. The first time I read Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, believe it or not, it took me 7 years to complete that book. And I read it for the second time. I just went straight through it like that. And then the third time, I went straight through it like that. But the first time, it took me 7 years to actually complete the reading of that. And that told me a lot more things about what being a black person was about. And I can understand better where the Rastas were coming from at that point, you see. And so there you go. There you have it. And so the importance of Rasta, because let's not forget, us blacks, us Africans, were captured from the motherland and were brought to the diasporas, were brought to the rest, and were used as slaves, chattel slavery, and so on. And the rules that were given to live by were from that of a Eurocentric aspect. So we never knew even our names. Our names were slave names: Bailey, Richmond, Lewis, Edwards, Smith Jones, etc., etc. These are not real African names. These are slave names, you see. And that's one of the reasons why Muhammad Ali, the great Muhammad Ali, changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali when he converted to Islam, because he said that I don't want a slave name. It's a slave name. And that's why a lot of the Muslims, nation people, the guys from the brothers and the sisters from the Nation of Islam, they changed their names from which were of course slave names into names which were not slave names, and so on. And even the Rastas, many Rastas, obviously part of the African diaspora, we all have slave names because the white man colonized us, enslaved us, and oppressed us. So even some Rastas adopted names like Ras Mekanon and Ras, Amotep, and so on, Ras or Jadis, Jadat, to kind of like get away from, the slave name. But even though officially we still have those slave names, because sometimes it does cost money to change your name from a slave name to an Afrocentric name or to a name which was originally ours from the motherland, they still kind of, if they can't afford to do it, they have an adopted name, like as I just mentioned, Ja Tuti or Ras Benny or whatever. You see, so as long as we're having a kind of, as long as we use some of Rasta's name as ours, if you get my drift, it's sort of difficult to explain, but you get my drift. And so that's what it's really very essential to know this. The importance of Rasta is also our dietary aspects. A lot of the foods we eat as black people wasn't our food, it's slavery food, you see. So even the rice, and even though I love rice, and we all love rice, peas, chicken, fish. If you're vegan, you love the vegan aspect of it, all of these things. But, a lot of that rice and potatoes, spud, yam and dumpling, even though they're hard food, a lot of it is not actually our original food. A lot of it is part of the slavery food. But the good thing is about our forefathers and our parents, grandparents, and sisters, they're very, very good. They're very creative in making slavery food into our own food, because the way we prepare food is not the same as how the white people prepare food. They don't put seasoning in their food. They don't cook their food thoroughly and properly like we do. You see, the Rastas came with a different concept of vital food. They came with the concept of nothing you eat should be living, should have four legs or two legs. So everything that the Rastas eat comes from the ground, comes from nature, comes from the trees, comes from the plants, and etc., etc. So they came with the whole dietary aspect of vital food, vitalism, naturalism, and now in 2023, you're seeing a lot of veganism. A lot of people converting to vegan, but originally vegan was from Rasta. That was vital or vital. You see, that was vitalism. Nothing, no preservatives, no added salt, sugars in your foods, and that was how they ate. And they ate a lot of raw foods. The Rastas. They never really cooked their foods. A lot of them lived outdoors as well. So as a result of this, because they lived outdoors, the cooking facilities were more or less null and void. They just got things and they put it together, and then they ate it, and so on. And then they made their own drinks. The way they did it was so revolutionary. I mean, even sometimes to this day, I'm astonished as to how they created their own stuff. But they had to do it because they did everything to get away from colonialism, and they did everything to get away from the white man having anything over them. Really, Rasta is anti-establishment, and you're going to say rebellion, but rebellion in a very good way, because it's not rebellion as if to say they're rebelling illegally against governments and authority. They're rebelling because it's injustice, because they know that them as well as their people from the motherland were taken against their rule from the motherland into an environment which isn't conducive to their natural habitat. It's almost like if you take a fish out of water. If you take a fish out of water, what happens to the fish? The fish dies. You know, because a fish needs water to swim, to live, and to enjoy, to live and to enjoy life. So it's like when you take a natural people out of their natural, you know, habitat and the natural, area of dwelling, then they're like a fish out of water. They're literally dying, or they're slowly dying, and it's not natural to them. They took us because of slavery, because we were physically strong. Both our men and women, most of the women, or some of the women, but most of the men were very physically strong. So they took our ancestors, and brought them over here free of charge. Some say that our forefathers and our ancestors in Africa sold us, but from what I've read, it wasn't like that. They bribed our ancestors and got us, and there's over 250 million of us, and some of our ancestors died en route at sea, en route to the diasporas, and then they had us, and then they put us all over the Americas, so South America, North America, the Caribbean, America itself, Canada. That's why you see a lot of black people, African people in those areas, those regions, because of the slavery. The slaves from especially West Africa, some East Africa, but particularly West Africa, Central Africa, and some from South Africa were brought over to those areas, and then eventually brought over to Europe, so the UK. And even though people have said that black people first came into England after around the Windrush of 1948, black people were in England and Britain and Europe before that. There's lots of histories and lots of stories, real stories about black people being in Europe. And let's not forget the Moors, because I spoke about the Moors not so long ago. That the Moors came into Europe and influenced Europe as to the dress code. They bought many things, the buildings, and we'll talk about it another time. But that's just a little snippet, just to kind of ties in with what we're talking about here. And so the Rastas were the ones who came with that concept, the dietary, and with rebellion against the corrupted, as Bob Marley and the Rastas, I would say, the corrupted Babylonian system, you see. And that's more or less it, you see. There's so many things we can talk about. I mean, as I said to you, you have to piece it together. And in my travels, when I've been to a lot of places. I've been to Egypt many years ago. I've been to Jamaica. I've been to America. I've been around England. I've been to France. I've been to Wales. And at the same time, there's a lot of places I've been to, and I've seen Rastas. And Rastas are the only ones who greet me. And even before I had my locks, they used to greet me and bow down like this. Once you're black, the Rastas, they love you, and they're amongst the most peaceful human beings I've ever come across. Extremely friendly. A lot of people have a bad perception of Rastas, that they're dirty, that they're untidy, that they don't wash themselves. But check this, my father said many years ago, because my father, of course, being from Jamaica, where the Rastafari movement started. My father said in the early days of Rasta, the 1940s Jamaica, 50s Jamaica, when my father was a young boy at that time, because my father was born in 1941. So my father would have been a few years old. He would have been a few years old going into his teenage years at that time. And at the same time, my father says that Rastas at that time used to go to the sea to have a wash. They used to wash themselves all the time. They used to go to the sea, river, and wash their locks, wash themselves, bathe, and then they used to live outdoors. They never used to live in the houses. Rastas never lived in houses. They lived outdoors. And so hence why they ate very healthy, because they picked the native fruits, the native vegetation from the crops. They were very adept at growing their own, cultivating the land, growing their own produce, and they lived outdoors and they made their own huts. Of course, if the rainy season comes, wintry season comes, they had shelter, but they never actually lived in houses itself. They made their own shelter, dwelling. And then when the season was a lot better, it was a lot more acceptable to live in and to be in. They didn't have that, but they had it as a precautionary measure. The huts, of course, it's sheltered. Of course, if they're having children and growing their young, they have to have protection for their children and so on. You see, The Rastas were very, very, meticulous, very, very methodic, very, very savvy, very, very smart, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew how to do it. They knew they were skilled men and women. The women were involved as well, but the women were more or less not on the forefront as well as the men. But the women were there helping the men. There's a bit similar to what I was talking about a few days ago when I did the documentary on the Moors. When I said that the Moorish women were there working in tandem with the men, but the Moorish women weren't pushed to the front as such, but they were there at the same time, assisting the men. But we're going to talk about that another time very, very soon. But the important Rastas is extremely important. They're amongst the first teachers in the modern times. What came and endorsed Marcus Garvey. They spoke about Marcus Garvey. They spoke about the importance of Marcus Garvey. This, how essential it was for black people to focus on themselves, to do for self, to focus on the motherland, to know where they're coming from, to learn about the greatness of our ancestors, and to know about Egyptology as well, because Egyptology is us. At school, our teachers never taught us about Egyptology. They never taught us about Marcus Garvey. They never taught us the importance of, our ancestors in Africa, what we did, our achievements, our feats. They spoke about only mostly Martin Luther King. They spoke about on one or two things, but they never maybe Nelson Mandela in the latter years after his release, but they never really told us about the real things from the motherland and how great we were. But they're not going to do that because that is not their agenda. They've got a different agenda, and their agenda is to make us feel worthless and unworthy and feel subhuman. But after you leave school, even after I left school, I started to read books, read magazines. I first started to become conscious when I read things about the black struggle in Ebony magazine from America, and then Essence magazine as well. Then after from Ebony, I started to go into other magazines, and then I started to know about books about people like Paul Robeson. And one of the best books I've ever read was a book called Ere I Stand, by Paul Robeson. One of the best books I've ever read, and that was because of the Rastas. The Rastas were the ones that taught me about people like Paul Robeson and to read about him, read about his struggle, you see, what he went through, Yeah, Paul Robeson was a guy, we'll talk about Paul Robeson another time, but just to quickly, hit upon it, well, Paul Robeson got his passport taken away from him, or to hit out against the, the, the Jim Crow rules in America, which was stifling black people at that time. You see, and this was just before the civil rights movement. You see, Jim Crow was really bad, and black people were suffering from it. You see, and so and so on. And then the Rastas taught me about Africa as a black man's home. I remember Sugar Minott sung a song called "Africa is a Black Man's Home," and I was about 18, 19 when I heard that song, and I'm thinking, it makes you think about, even though I knew Africa was a continent, and I knew that I knew that people came from Africa, I knew that, but I never realized that it was officially our own. Even though in the Bible it talks about Ethiopia, or some would say that Ethiopia was originally called Africa, or Africa was originally called Ethiopia, but at the same time, the whole continent, Africa, some say Al-Kabalan, some say Kush, Egypt, Kush, Ethiopia, or just the land of Kush. And there's other names for it, but Aphidolos, Africa, and so on. And so at the same time, you see, you learn so many things from some of the songs that I was listening to at that time. You see, Dennis Brown, the great Dennis Brown, sang a song called "Africa We Want to Go Home." Then I get to learn that national reform that reiterated the the facts even more that us as a people were from that continent. And then you get to learn about our feats and our achievements. And as I said, it stems from the Rasta teachings. You've got to still thank people like Mortimer Plano, men like Mortimer Plano, who came after Leonard Howell, who first started to teach about Rastafari and the movement of Rasta in the early 1900s. And that's what got a lot of Rastas to know about their place and about Selassie. After Selassie, Haile Selassie, who is, as I mentioned in streams of thought, is the god of Rasta. Rastas view Haile Selassie as their god. And even though that Rastas, let's not get what I say misconstrued. As I said before, and I'm gonna do many more streams about it because we're gonna make sure that the point is clear. At the same time as I'm saying that, let's know that Haile Selassie isn't God Almighty. He didn't create the heavens and the earth. He didn't create the land. He didn't create you and me. He didn't create the animals and the fishes in the sea. That kind of rhymes. You and me, animals, fish in the sea. But it wasn't meant to. It wasn't intentional. But yeah. But Selassie at the same time was a great man. Was he? A lot of people said, "How comes he left Ethiopia when Ethiopia was being was virtually on the brink of being colonized by the Italians?" I think it was is it Benito Mussolini and his armies wanted to colonize it. He had to leave the land. It's tactical because he had to leave the land to get help, to get aid, to get assistance. He came to the UK, and Empress Menen went to Israel. I think he went to Israel as well, and they had to kind of like have an exile from Ethiopia. So they went. So Selassie went on exile, and so did Empress Menen. They both went on exile to come away from that and to regroup and to see how they're going to help their country. And look what the result was. Look what the consequence was. When they both came back into Ethiopia, they won. Selassie won. He defeated the armies of Benito Mussolini, you know, in the 1930s. It was very similar in the Battle of Adwa, where his father, Ras Mekinen, fought. In the Battle of Adwa in 1896. 1896, so that was 4 years after Haile Selassie was born. Selassie was only 4 years at that time, 4 years old, when his father fought. And let's not forget, when Haile Selassie's father fought in the Battle of Adwa in 1896, yeah, the Ethiopians' army, compared to the Italian army, because Italy tried to come into Ethiopia the first time then, and then the second time was with Mussolini, and Selassie emulated his father by fighting off the Italian rear guard. But back to what I was saying before, in the Battle of Adwa in 1896, the Italians had a lot stronger army than the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians, they were outnumbered by at least probably something like 10 to 1, and the Italian army was more trained and more skilled than the Ethiopian army. But somehow they managed to win by the strength of God Almighty and just willpower and just being blessed, the blessed people. They won and they defeated the armies of the Italians in 1896. That's why the Battle of Adwa is a very important date on the Rasta calendar, because that was very symbolic. That look, our people we can overcome, colonization, and look, we were outnumbered, and plus they're more skilled than we were, and we still beat them to retain our land. And then they came back again somewhat. 1896. They came back almost 40 years later, 39 years later, to try and do, I think it was 35, wasn't it? Somewhere there. Anyway, it was in the 30s. But Selassie fought off, Mussolini's attempt. So Rasta, the symbolism of Rasta isn't just your locks you have on your head. A lot of people get mixed up. I think it's just the locks and that you smoke. Everybody does what Bob Marley and Peter Tosh, used to them, and Dennis Brown and Gregory Isaac smoke. It's not all about that. It's not just the locks and weed smoking and singing reggae music and chanting down Babylon. It's not about that. It's about your liberty. It's about how you live. I mentioned the Rastas early, how they lived in those early days. I've mentioned that. And that's what it's all about, how they lived, and they were able to cultivate the land and the dietary aspect and the teachings. Yeah, they talk about Haile Selassie, but they also talk about the forefathers, the great ancestors of years gone by. Some in the Bible, because a lot of the Rastas are Bible conscious. They're very conscious about the scriptures, and even though some people don't believe in the scriptures, a lot of people don't believe in it. They don't. They don't buy it. They don't think that it's relevant. You know. But even the Rastas have twisted it on its head, and instead of using it as the Bible comes from us. A lot of people say that the Bible is a Eurocentric book. You know, in my personal opinion, I think there's some truth in the Bible, but some of it has been fabricated somewhat. But I do think the Rastas make it a good claim because they make it look as though because we were the first people on the planet. Black people were the first people on the planet, you see. And I think at the same time, because black people were the first people on the planet, I think when the Rastas twisted twisted the narratives over in favor of us as a people on the continent, I think that was a very good job on their part. You see, so talking about people like Abraham, you know, King David, you know, Melchizedek, who some Boba Dreads believe is the actual God Almighty. You know, some people actually believe that Melchizedek is the God Almighty. I spoke to a very good friend of mine, a Boba Dread. I hope you don't. I don't think he minds me calling his Ras Anthony Bryan. He's a singer, but he's my good friend. He's been on my show when I was on SLR many years ago, and I interviewed him. And he talked years ago. This is about 15 years ago. He said that if you look in a book and there's a name called Melchizedek, he's actually God. And if he said to me, if you read some of the things in the Bible, Melchizedek, he said, not many people know this, and not many people have read this in the Bible. Not many people they see his name in the Bible, but they don't really follow what he's saying or what he's about. But if you read about him in the Bible and see the things he's done and what he represents, he's actually God. He's actually living God or the living God. I've never heard that before, and I've spoken to a lot of Rastas in my time. You know, I've been to meetings. I've been around a lot. He's the first person I've ever heard talk about that, about this Melchizedek being, you know, the Almighty, even the head of their supposed God, which is Haley said, pick up, and you have to dissect it. You have to look into it and see it and pick as my I used to say, you're gonna